Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, I don't know if you've been watching lately, but things are a little bit complex right now. Let's just be real. 2020 is a curveball that quite a few of us were not expecting, and we have been flustered into a crisis situation of insane magnitude in some ways. And so I want to talk about that. Let's simplify how to actually thrive in a crisis situation. And, when I was looking at various books that come across my desk, there was one book that stood out recently called Lifeboat. And it's written by an author. Her name is Maggie Craddock. And it actually dives into lessons learned from the Titanic. Aha. More coming here soon. So Maggie Craddock, she is the president and CEO of Workplace Relationships. She's also a veteran executive coach known for her work with Fortune 500 CEOs and senior management. Now, she's been seen almost everywhere: CNBC, ABC News, NPR, as well as the Harvard Business Review and Oprah Magazine. She received her master's in economics from the London School of Economics, and her latest book is called Lifeboat: Navigating Unexpected Career Change and Disruption. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Maggie Craddock. Hey, Maggie.
Hey, Mary. Delighted to be here.
I'm glad you're here, and I wish it was under better circumstances.
I do too.
Let's just be real. What a year it's been. And I should say right out the gate, we are recording this on July 16th, 2020. So we're a little bit over halfway there. And I feel like all of us deserve a trophy by the year end, most certainly, right?
Couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more.
So I also have to come right out of the gate and confess to two very embarrassing secrets about me. One is this. When I was a child, I hated history. I despised having to read history books about things that happened in the past to dead people. That was my childish way of looking at it. That was one. And two, when I think about the Titanic, before reading your book, I thought, man, this is going to be a depressing topic. How in the world are we going to be able to do this one? But then I read your book, and I can gladly say that both fact number one about me and fact number two are thrown out the window, and such a foolish thing, because there was so much beautiful storytelling and rich history in your book, learning about the details and nuances of the Titanic that I think is so applicable to our work and our life right now in more ways than one. So just wanted to say that up front.
Thank you so much. What a lovely tee off to this discussion. I really appreciate it.
Well,
I'm
really curious to hear from you. I mean, you mentioned it in the book, but what is your initial fascination or attraction to what happened to the Titanic? Where did you first get interested in reading about that?
Well, it's interesting because, Mary, it goes back to my childhood as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about the complicated things that are unfolding around us, the story of the Titanic just cuts right through to the fact that the skills that we need to deal with things when it's business as usual are not the same skills that we need when we're dealing with extraordinary change and disruption. But I think part of it was my mother used to take me to the theater when I was a little girl.
Mm.
And she took me to see the musical, The Unsinkable Molly Brown, the one that they made the movie with Debbie Reynolds.
Yeah.
And I was so captivated by that story that I went home. Now, I'll admit I am a history nerd, so full confession there. But I went home and started reading the life stories and the actual history of all these individuals on the Titanic. So I've been a Titanic nerd my entire life. I've devoured the stories, and I really think that one of the things that's fascinating right now is that at a very human level, many of the questions that Titanic survivors ask themselves are timeless in that they're so simple and they're so right at the heart of what we're facing today.
Yeah.
How long will this situation last? How bad is it going to get? Who can I actually trust to help me through this? And I think most important, how will this situation change me?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I go back to the Unsinkable Molly Brown, One of the things we can say in the midst of this crisis is it's an opportunity for informal leaders to emerge. It's an opportunity for people to do what Molly Brown and some other survivors were able to do. Tap into what other people need at a human level in the present moment. Offer them words of comfort. Come up with strategic ideas to get through problems. The official people in charge thought they were dead in the water. She noticed 2 to an oar. They would survive and move forward.
Yeah.
Stand up, right? And speak truth to power when necessary, which Margaret Brown did on that lifeboat. So they're all things that we're facing today, and they're really inspirational stories we can learn from.
Well, and that was what I thought was intriguing to me. Coming from a person who, doesn't really get attracted to reading about history, I was sucked right into it with your book. And I learned things that I didn't know. I mean, the fact that there was these 3 key men at the helm of, what went wrong there. So kind of give us a high level, if anybody's, been living under a rock for God knows how long and doesn't really know what happened on the Titanic. Give us a high level, brief overview of what happened, and also how you see that some things in life are very similar to what happened to those survivors happening right now.
Well, at the high level, I always try to help people understand the fact that the things that took the Titanic down started long before that ship left port.
Right.
Right. There was cost cutting. There were minimal safety precautions. As we know, they didn't have enough lifeboats. They're hurtling through the waters of the Atlantic, at top speed. Right. And then the gentleman, you mentioned the people in that lifeboat, the quartermaster, Robert Hitchens, had his hands on the wheel of the Titanic as it was barreling straight for that iceberg. And I guess in one of history's most tragic stories of responsibility without authority, right? He wasn't authorized to turn that wheel without a superior officer telling him to do so. And at the last minute he did, but he didn't do it quickly enough and tragedy ensued, right? Yeah. And so that wasn't the end of this nightmare for Robert Hitchens. We pick him up again when he's been put in charge of something else. Now he's in charge of lifeboat number 6, right? With a couple of other guys, and they're lowered into the water with like over 40 women on this lifeboat, and these 3 guys, and nobody knows what to do. Yeah. None of the women have any naval training. They're not strong enough to row this thing. And the guys in charge get into a power struggle, and Hitchens starts going on and on about how they're all doomed. And Margaret Brown is looking around. She's offering articles of clothing, words of comfort. She's bonding with the other women in first class who are used to having things going smoothly, and things are not going smoothly, Mary, right? And then she's the one who gets that inspirational idea, wait a minute, I can get them 2 to an oar, and practically they're going to start rowing. They're going to keep warm. We're going to get moving. And then Robert Hitchens, who doesn't want to give up that formal authority, tries to shut her down. And at this point, I think she discovers a strength she didn't even know she had. She suddenly summons this strength. She stands up and she says, if he doesn't knock off the pessimism, they're going to throw him overboard. And everyone else in the lifeboat unites around her. I say all the time, Margaret Brown did not think her way to greatness. She was not strategizing to move ahead in the naval hierarchy. Yeah. She aligned her thoughts and feelings and intentions in the present moment, and greatness found her.
And, I think you could have just taken the word Titanic out of what you just said there and pretty much described any person who's ever worked in a corporate job and had a nightmare situation, like literally word to word.
Well, we can take this story, and we do in the book, and we compare it. And the interesting thing, Mary, is I started writing this 5 years ago. Yeah. I had no idea it would come out in these conditions. But we compare it so often to leaders in business who find themselves in what feels like these no-win situations. Right. And they guide people and create a spirit of unity in businesses of all sizes. And they help their firm survive. They speak truth to power, and they really find that inner alignment that enables them to rise to a challenge and say the right thing or find the right moment. And sometimes they're even stunned by what they've done. They didn't realize they had that skill or those words or that insight in them. But when they're in the present moment, really aligning their feelings, their thoughts, and focusing on what other people need at a human level, rather than just thinking transactionally, they tap into strengths that they were unaware of.
And
it's fascinating.
Do you know what I thought was an interesting parallel I picked up very early on in reading the book was just the simple fact that so many people believe the Titanic, the ship itself, was unsinkable, that was a blatant truth that was just believed amongst the crew and the passengers. And, I think for me, as a small business owner, been in business for 17 years now, certain things that you believe in your life are just unsinkable, that a pandemic can certainly flip upside down. From the early days of not being able to find toilet paper to later months going, well, is the government going to help the small business owner because we are literally sinking? And I think it's really interesting. The things that we believe are foundational and unshakable that we rely on are not necessarily as airtight and strong as we think. Do you see that as well?
Well, yes, and this is part of the power of the lifeboat process and why I wrote it.
Yeah.
Because for many of us, our thoughts are fairly strategic under normal conditions. We like to think we're logical, right? Yep. But under extreme pressure, we've got all these emotional triggers that can lead to polarized thinking and black and white thinking and skewed thinking and conditioned responses where we react rather than respond. And so what goes on in this process is it opens things up so that we can move from reacting to responding and question some of those assumptions. The reason they thought the Titanic was unsinkable was because an ambitious press person actually wrote that word in an early press release, and people just took it and ran with it. Legally, when they looked at it later, they never actually made that claim. But people read it in the press and the story moved on. And when it comes to you, how you react in business, how you react under pressure, oftentimes we have to look at the narratives we create for ourselves around justifying our responses or even what our limits are. And so when we start questioning our assumptions and we start in the present moment, really noticing what's happening right now, as opposed to secondhand information or taking someone else's word for it, we widen the range of possibilities we have to respond to unexpected change and respond effectively.
And I really want to get down to the very practical, simple parts and have you explain the lifeboat process. But I wanted to tee it up a little bit because in the introduction, I felt like your book mentioned, this truly does break it down in simple ways. And that's what I love about it. This book is going to help you spot trouble, manage your fear, trust yourself and others, learn how to foster cooperative and supportiveness amongst teams and people that you're kind of flung into a situation with, and also learn how to take simple, effective action towards whatever crisis situation you're in. And I truly believe it. Your book does that, so it's really well written. And I remember there was a part in there where you talk about emotional agility. Now I know what physical agility is. Being able to run the race, do the marathon is not just a sprint, all of that. But can you define emotional agility and how does one cultivate more in a professional sense?
I think emotional agility is understanding that there are a wide range of power styles or ways of responding to things under pressure. It's not necessarily just the one you've been conditioned to go with, your go-to strengths. Some people are fantastic at being decisive or commanding respect. Some people are fabulous at being collaborative and inspiring compassion and empathy. They're a wide range of styles. And the other thing to remember about all these different power styles is they can morph under pressure. So in Lifeboat, we talk about how all these different power styles were actually demonstrated by people on the Titanic. And you can see how many of them did morph when they moved from the ship to the lifeboat in terms of those survivors. But what we want to remember in our own lives and careers, and even what we want to model for our kids when we're working from home, right, is that emotional intelligence is important. But we want to make that actionable so that we're not just sure of how we feel or expressing ourselves emotionally. We also want to be mindful of the full range of emotional perspectives of other people and how they feel about themselves after they've been in contact with us. That's what makes us agile. And that's what ties this to that strategic pause so powerfully. We talk about taking a strategic pause under pressure. You want to tap into your authentic feelings, and then you want to pause and remember, what are the wide range of emotional vantage points of other people? People are always saying to me, Maggie, I'm not sure why people follow me, or I'm not sure why people feel they have a sense of belonging in this organization. And I'm like, well, it depends. Different people follow you for different reasons. Different people feel validated, included, and motivated for different reasons.
Yeah.
And from the lifeboat perspective, you want to be in the present moment looking for those nuances so you're agile enough to adjust. And remember that when you shift your power style, you shift the internal conversation that other people are having with themselves in your presence.
Yeah, and the team dynamic, right.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's what I think is really interesting is that if you think about if you were on the Titanic and you were a first class passenger who had, a multitude of butlers at your beck and call to provide you any most ridiculous request ever, flung into a situation where it might be just a mix of crew and first class and all things. I mean, you're really sort of flung into a situation where it's not like necessarily a work environment where you do know people's strengths. You're just sort of figuring it out very, very quickly all at once, right?
Absolutely. And so you do want to be mindful in the present moment of, what's going on with other people. What are the nuances you can notice of how they're reacting, particularly now in this environment where many of us are working from home? We literally want to discipline ourselves to not make those snap judgments, to not look at how long it took someone to respond or how terse their response was, and create a narrative in our heads that's going to prevent us from giving them the benefit of the doubt. We want to stay present and discipline ourselves any way we can. And one really wonderful way of doing this for your listeners, Mary, is to think about, if you're dealing with like losing a document or losing a client or something unexpected is happening to you, how do you react under pressure to the people closest to you? That's someone from your family who wanders into the room and interrupts your webinar, right? Or someone close to you on your staff that needs something and you're late to your next webinar or a deadline. How do you respond? Because this goes to how we respond to ourselves under pressure and reminds us to stay centered in that thought process and with those emotional triggers, because at a time like this, we literally want to discipline ourselves, right? To make sure that we're practicing patience, we're taking those strategic pauses, and remembering to be mindful of the fact that there can be a wide range of reasons for why people are responding the way they are. That really is the key, I think, to leading and mentoring remotely in a more effective way.
Yeah, and I want to clarify something that you said just there. When you say strategic pause, we are not talking about freezing and no action whatsoever. We're not talking about suppressing our emotions, our feelings, and going just completely numb. It's something different. So tell us a little bit more about strategic pausing in your mind.
Well, absolutely, because, we talk a lot in the book, Mary, about making the shift from what I call the big ship mindset, right, to the lifeboat mindset.
And that's ship with a P there, everybody, just so you know.
but literally, when you're thinking from that way of dealing with reality that applied to people when they were on that ship that, as we've discussed, they thought was unsinkable, right? The first thing when I'm saying big ship, I want your listeners to bear in mind, I'm not talking about the size of an organization. There are big multinational companies around the world trying to embrace a lifeboat approach on their senior management teams. But I'm talking about something that's rooted in what has worked before. It's rooted in a sense of older norms. And with that comes this tendency to play the part that you've been assigned, keep your game face on under pressure, and suppress uncomfortable feelings. And when it's business as usual, many of us have been so well trained to do that, sometimes we don't even know what's happening. Something irritates us, and it's an automatic internal process. We push those feelings down, we smile gently, right? We take a tight little breath, and we move on. And then, of course, some of the other things that go with this big ship approach, right, are being busy all the time, allowing ourselves to be perpetually scheduled. And sometimes if there's a problem, we want to solve it as quickly as possible, right? Faster is better.
Right.
But all of that sort of changes when we're in what I call the lifeboat mindset. Because what we're dealing with the lifeboat mindset is, remember, the lifeboat mindset, and you mentioned it before, Mary, one minute you're on this ship, and you've been in first class and you've got the butlers and all this. And now you're huddled in this tiny ship fighting for your life, right? With people you don't know. And so the thing about the lifeboat approach is it's geared for norms where we have more questions than answers.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to unfold next. And I think many of us can agree with that because we've talked about the fact that you and I are having this discussion today.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to unfold in our world tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
But the norms of the lifeboat mindset go to really being present in the moment.
Yep.
And then here comes the strategic pause we're talking about. And here's where it's different. The strategic pause is about realizing that you need to be aware of your feelings. You also need to be aware of the things you can do that can distract you from feelings you'd prefer to avoid under pressure.
Yep.
Sometimes our minds drift. Sometimes we think about our shopping list. Sometimes we just can't wait to interrupt someone, right? Sometimes our own breath tightens. I remind people all the time of two acronyms I think are really powerful around the strategic shift. The first one is WAIT, W-A-I-T, wait. Why am I talking, right? But the second one, and this is vital for the strategic pause, is HAIL, H-A-I-L, HAIL, how am I listening? Not only how am I listening to you, but how am I listening to myself?
Yeah.
Am I staying centered in the present moment? And then again, back to the Margaret Brown example we talked about before, the third thing from the lifeboat perspective is reminding yourself that you don't have to have all the answers. You align your thoughts, your feelings, and your intentions in the present moment, and you look for the next positive thing you can do, like one row of the oar at a time, and that will help you navigate unexpected change and get yourself aligned for possibilities when all the crisis abates.
And that's the secret. That's where the emotional agility becomes more present. Yeah, I mean, you grow in resilience and grit and all the things that you need in order to step up and respond in the situation. Because we've all heard about flight, fight, or freeze. And, I'm systemically a fighter. Let's just be real. That is how I respond to most situations, big or small. Not physically, yeah, obviously, but that's just the way my personality is. But I have to share a little story with you here because I think it's important to kind of share light in. So about a year and a half ago, my mother went in for spinal surgery, was told this is a very standard operation. You'll be out of the hospital in 4 days. Long story short, she had a complication and an allergic reaction to one of the drugs and, started choking. And I was in the hospital room while it was happening. And me, a normal fighter, at first was going, oh, this is not normal. Let's get a nurse in here and figure this out. Immediately found myself frozen. There were 15 nurses that rushed into the room to save my mother's life, code blue, the whole nine. And so, you might be surprised at how you react in a very extreme situation. You just never know. But then also, that freeze moment, was my first initial reaction to it once we got nurses into the space. But then I would like to believe, looking back, that it was also shifted into a strategic pause where I knew I had to calm myself, take a deep breath, and take that moment to go, okay, how can I be of help in this room? I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. And my mind and my heart shifted immediately to, I want to protect my father. So dialing him up very quickly to make sure he doesn't just dart into a room and see something he can't unsee in the ICU room. And so, I think I see the truth in a strategic pause, in giving yourself, even if it's a split second, a deep breath, so that you don't get stuck in the frozen, and also you're positioning yourself in the place where you can be of most service to others, right?
I think that is such a wonderful example, Mary, and I'm so honored that you shared it with regards to this material, because I think one of the things that we talk about from the Lifeboat Mindset and the strategic pause is let's just be aware of a very simple fact.
Yeah.
There's so many things you don't know, and one of them is you don't know how you're going to react under extreme pressure. And knowing you don't know is powerful.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of this that this process can help with. Because I've had many people call me up and say, Maggie, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I did this. Thought leaders who get their big opportunity to speak truth to power. And there comes their moment in the conversation and they open their mouth and what comes out is nothing. They can't remember. Their brain flatlines right in that moment. They're not sure. Of course, they regroup later and they come back online. But what this process teaches us all to embrace, and we learn from those lifeboat survivors, is it's as naive to think you know what you're going to do in the face of unexpected change and extraordinary pressure as it is to think your ship is unsinkable.
Yeah.
You can't know. And so knowing you can't know, you can train yourself for some practices that will train you to respond and come back online effectively as quickly as possible. And that's correct. And I think when we're facing, so this is about not just the decisions we make or what we do in any one moment. This is about training ourselves to be prepared for the unknown and having confidence in a decision-making process and a way we recondition our relationships with ourselves so that we are prepared for what we're already accepting that we may be unaware of.
Yeah. So talk to me then about what an inner iceberg is. You talk about that in the book.
You know, the inner iceberg really is, I think, a very helpful metaphor for people just being able to spot what they can see on the surface, what they know about themselves, what have been their go-to reactions most of the time under pressure. Because you can see these reactions and you know this about yourself consciously. The inner iceberg are all those things that when we're moving quickly through life, and this is totally understandable, we've stuffed our feelings, we've stayed focused, we've stuffed our feelings, we've played our part for everyone else, we've supported them. We've stuffed so many things that we don't necessarily even remember them anymore. And now suddenly, and this is why I think that this is an extraordinary time to be having the discussion about the process in this book, suddenly for many of us, a lot of things have stopped in the world and we're stopping too. And there you go with these reactions under pressure, which can just tap into things we didn't even know were there, particularly when we're dealing with a lot of triggers on a lot of different fronts. So many times people will be surprised. They'll be like, wow, I kind of overreacted to that one. I just got off that webinar so quickly. I started to get very irritated and caught into a power struggle. And I was so frustrated that someone couldn't see my point of view from my vantage point. I almost couldn't continue the conversation. That's not me. But as we learn to take those strategic pauses and we stop stuffing the feelings, we actually embrace the learning moments to strengthen our relationship with ourselves so that we can tap into the feelings, but we have these constructive processes for not letting those take us off into like some kind of self-created narrative where we cast ourselves as a victim, right? And we justify a vantage point on something that will give us permission to overreact or underreact. But stay with them and pause as opposed to stuffing them. We'll get through them. And it creates a much more powerful relationship with yourself. And I think that relationship with yourself is the gateway to charting your own course professionally and not having it dictated for you by outside forces.
Right. So back to the big ship mindset versus the lifeboat mindset. Instead of being the orchestra player still playing the music while the sink's going down, let's just be real. Maybe shifting over to that lifeboat mindset. What do you think in your mind is the first question you should be asking yourself?
Well, I think that you should ask yourself one of these questions like, am I being emotionally honest with myself, or are there things I'm suppressing? And I also think, Mary, it's helpful to get feedback from people you trust in your professional community, in your family, because there's some things that it's really tough to do alone. I'm always reminding people that people need people, right? Particularly in a crisis. We can't row a lifeboat through the waters of the Atlantic by ourselves. We really can't, And we definitely can't realize some of these pieces of the inner iceberg, these emotional facets that may be shaping our reactive patterns with other people, in our careers, even in our homes, right? Without perspective from others. So, many of your listeners may have somebody they already know on their speed dial that they call all the time when they're just like, wow, I got to dish about this one and get my head on straight.
Yeah.
But it's valuable for everybody to think about somebody that doesn't have a vested interest in what they're doing, somebody maybe not necessarily working in their same department in their same firm, but people they know that can give them candid feedback on, do you think I sound like I'm emotionally centered and honest with myself as I talk about this situation? Am I giving other people the benefit of the doubt under pressure? Or am I being a little judgmental? Am I being objective here? Or am I clear with myself about my own motives in this situation? And if I'm not, why not?
Yeah.
Because we really want to look at things deeper, not just to help us make tactical decisions.
Yep.
Those things on the surface, like, do I take this job or that, or hire this person or that one? But to really develop that confidence in our decision-making process so that we trust ourselves more and more under pressure. And again, we're prepared to respond rather than react when we face the unknown.
Yeah. And what I hear in what you say there is, I think the base level is we try to think our way out of problems, right? Like strategy, budgets, this, very analytical. And that's, very important part of the process, but that's not the whole process. But
No.
it sounds like, tapping into, your thinking mode, your brain and your analytical side, but tapping into your heart when it comes to your emotions and feelings and core strengths underneath, but then also taking it one step further and tapping into your gut, your intuitive side. And when you become aligned with, as you say, what you truly believe in and how you make decisions, that's the place of power in how to truly thrive in a crisis, whatever it is, big or small. Right?
Well, and absolutely, Mary. One of the reasons I love the story of the Titanic so much is when you were gracious enough to refer to my bio at the beginning of this segment, right? I've had the opportunity to work with some very senior executives and leaders in the military and spiritual leaders and people from all around the world about these concepts of power. So you take people in the halls of power, men and women, and they know that the most important conversations they're having are the ones they're having with themselves. Because by the time they articulate something, it's quickly becoming policy.
Yeah.
They know to wait before they speak, because once they tell people their point of view, everybody's scurrying to line up behind what they just said, and they're not going to get the feedback they need. So the work that I'm talking about in Lifeboat is the internal work that senior executives have been focused on for years. But many of us in all these different ranks have just been trained to do what we're told, play the role that we're playing, and we haven't looked at the internal dimension of all of these decisions the same way. But right now, thank you, political unrest. Thank you, COVID. Okay. We are all the senior executives of our own lifeboat.
That's true.
We are all running our firms, and the surface idea of what we do, how we execute tactically, isn't really enough.
Yeah.
We're facing the unknown, just like the CEO of a large company, and we have to make strategic decisions under pressure that are going to have real life impacts on our families, on our employees, on other people. And so again, we talked about the big ship mindset, move quicker, move quicker. That might be fine if you're working from a script that someone else has written for you.
Yeah.
But you want to pause in the present moment and make sure that you have aligned your gut, which you really believe is true and aligns with your core values, and your clearest thought process in the moment, because right now we're figuring out who we can trust. And as I say in the book, one of the things about this is, how is going through this going to change you? We look at the Titanic survivors and the legacy that followed many of them. Leaders during this period are going to have to look back on their leadership legacy at this historic period in time. And what will this say about them in their careers? All of us are going to look back at how we navigated this period, managing our families, managing our friendships, managing our firms, right? And what is this legacy, and how did we course correct? And what did we do during a really extraordinary period in our economy?
Well, and that's the aha moment, is that when we look back at history, and history always repeats itself, and what happens is that there are people like me, old me, who would be like, whatever, old people doing dead stuff, it's actually true, and you can learn from the mistakes, but also learn from the triumphs. And what I thought was very clever about how you structured this book is that the chapters are based on 8 different questions to ask yourself, and things like, is this ship safe? What if I freeze in a crisis? What do I do then? How do I find that inner strength that you're talking about when you're deep under pressure? And it takes that in kind of bite-sized pieces, which I found was very useful in examining that in my own life, personally and professionally. But here's the thing, Maggie. I think a lot of people, especially my clients, have vocalized this to myself, and I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, yeah, I've certainly felt it too, is that this pandemic this year has been a whole lot of change in so many multitude of ways and so many different aspects of people's lives, whether it is losing clients or revenue, or for some people losing their job, or all of a sudden being flung into homeschooling if they have kids, or they've got health scares. So it's like you're being attacked. Maybe that's a strong word, but really your foundation of safe, of comfort is being jeopardized in many different angles all at the same time. It's not just I've lost my job, okay, I need to figure that out, or I've come down with a scary diagnosis, I've got to figure that out. It's like all things are sort of being shifted all at the same time. And so do you suggest then at this moment, like for those people out there that are dealing with it in multiples of ways, lifeboat feedback or other things can help them steady the ship? What would you say to them?
Oh, absolutely. I think lifeboat feedback will steady it. But, we could write this chapter together, Mary. I'm having so much fun with this conversation. We are being assailed on every single level by changes, right? And I think that when it's business as usual for many people, going from that big ship mindset, playing your part, moving quickly, all of this, right? Sometimes this happens at the speed of machinery.
Yeah.
Sometimes this happens at the speed of the computer. And we forget, we get so caught up in the transactional dimension of what we're doing that we forget how vital it is to shift to the human dimension. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that comes out at every single level of the lifeboat process is, look, in all circumstances, we agree that people matter. We definitely do. Yeah. Of course, when everything seems fine and you can just burn through talent and you think you're going to have just enough money to catch a deep breath or take a vacation or whatever. But right now, in a crisis, when people are thinking about literally sheer survival, they're watching people die from COVID, just like we've watched people die on the Titanic. They're concerned about the safety of their children and their loved ones in this environment. And they're concerned, if they're running businesses, probably in a very heartfelt way, about the lives and standard of living of people who have trusted them.
Yeah.
And invested in their organization to help them go the course. There are all these things going on. And so it's absolutely critical that we make this shift so that we remember the human dimension of people mattering, and we remember that in our relationship with ourselves, right? Yeah. Start your day focused on something positive. Remember to set the boundaries where you need, even within yourself, so that you're not operating so quickly that you're giving yourself away. And you don't have time to hit reset when you need to. When it comes to organizations, make sure that your actions and your values are aligned. Make sure that that's happening on a consistent basis, and make sure that you value your time and energy, because I'll tell you, we talk about making the shift from self-help to us-help, but I think that when you value your own time and energy, your self-respect seeds mutual respect with other people.
Yeah.
And there's so much power in that, right? It's a human time.
Yeah,
right?
Completely. And, why is it that sometimes us women, on top of it all, we're also grappling with guilt? I mean, what would you say to them as well?
I would say that if you look at the inner iceberg that we talked about, that piece beneath the surface literally has a neon sign in the middle of it that's like flashing guilt, because so many women that are incredibly accomplished. You'd think they don't have a problem in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll call up and they'll say, Maggie, I couldn't sleep. I'm worried. Am I a good enough mother? Am I a good enough board member? Am I a good enough manager? Am I a good enough wife? Am I a good enough date, right? Guilt, guilt, guilt. And we have to stop and remember, wait, let's give ourselves a break here. We all have more questions than answers right now. There are 24 hours in a day. It's probably one of the most powerful things you can do on behalf of yourself in terms of your ability to negotiate conflict with others in a way that fortifies your personal integrity rather than diminishing it because you're running on fumes, or really in terms of your ability to build or align yourself with organizations that reinforce your core values, is that you discipline yourself to stop.
Yeah.
And particularly when we're home, stop means put the computer down, turn it off, right? Understand that if it's not a life and death situation that involves your immediate family, you'll get to them tomorrow. And remember to take the time to be human. That is critical to maintaining the emotional resilience we need to navigate this period. Because again, one of those lifeboat questions, how long will this last? Well, there are days, Mary, when we're not quite sure.
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
It's true. And, even the simplest of ways when you do shut down the computer at the end of the day, just taking that 10 or 15 minutes to get outside for a quick walk around the block, it does wonders to reset your mind frame and, just put an end cap on this portion of my day and a starting point for, your evening time with your family or children. I think it makes a huge difference, and you do have time for it.
You do have time for it, but let's be aware of one thing. It's not like slowing down or self-care comes without discipline, because you'd think that would be such a relief.
Yeah.
But there's a piece of you that's been trained and conditioned to give yourself away. We're talking about women and the guilt and that internal iceberg. Yeah. So there's a little voice that's going to go on there and protest and go, oh, no, I need to do this, I need to do that. And they'll have to force themselves to go outside and hug that tree the first couple of times.
Right.
And then they'll realize how great it is. Yeah. And then everything will shift. Yeah. Right? But it's a reconditioning process.
Well, I'm going to say it here now, Maggie. I think your book is required reading if you serve on a board of governors for any sort of association or large organization. I remember when I was on a board of governors a while back for an international association, 5,000 members globally. Gosh, I certainly felt like a cavalier trying to steer a giant ship and getting frustrated when things move very, very slowly. But, if you do serve in a board way, I certainly recommend reading this book, because I think it will give you insight in realizing that, again, like you say, it doesn't matter how big or small the organization is, change can happen, and you and your members and constituents can get back to thriving once again. So Absolutely. The book is called Lifeboat, Navigating Unexpected Career Change and Disruption. It is available wherever books are sold right now, so you can find that anywhere where you get books as well. Also, your website is called workplacerelationships.com. I'll put all these links in the show notes for people, so you can just go to thesimplifierspodcast.com to find all of that. And I have a couple questions as we wrap up, Maggie, that I like to ask everybody. First and foremost, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
First question is this. What's one book or blog that you just feel is brilliant, that you find is either strengthening your belief system or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
There are two books that I go back to again and again, Mary, and they're older ones. So, history buff, right? Yeah. Man's Search for Meaning by Rollo May is an absolute classic. And there's another one called Small is Beautiful by Schumacher that I think won the Nobel Prize. And it's really interesting in how we manage at a human level and how we align human values with business profitability. Just two excellent, timeless books.
Brilliant. Well, we will put a link in the show notes for both of those books, so people, if you guys want to check those out. So tell me, who is one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to amazing things? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll also interview them on the podcast.
I think somebody that has done some incredible work, really selfless work, supporting organizations and people getting off the ground floor around the world is Amanda Pollinger.
Mm.
And she works with 100 Women in Finance, and she is just tireless in terms of going to different parts of the world and making sure that women have an opportunity to add value and thrive in terms of their lives and careers.
She sounds very interesting. Well,
She really
we'll definitely link up with her and put her in the show notes as well. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I am grateful for the fact that it isn't raining and it's a beautiful sunny day. And I live in a wonderful neighborhood and am sheltering in place with my husband and best friend. So we get to take a walk around the block. And I am also grateful for the fact that I have a new granddaughter, Charlotte,
Aw.
that was born about 5 weeks ago safely in the hospital. And our daughter is doing beautifully. So I feel like we have so much to be grateful for in our lives today.
And you know what? Sometimes it is those little things. And again, the relationships in our life that actually make this life worth living. So that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. So
Absolutely.
if people wanted to connect with you online, is LinkedIn the best place?
LinkedIn is a fantastic place for them to connect with me. That's one of my favorite social media portals, and I do my best to answer as many questions and get back to as many people as possible.
Perfect. Well, again, we'll put that link in the show notes for people at thesimplifierspodcast.com. So my last question for you today is this. And again, Maggie, just want to pause and acknowledge you. You've turned somebody who hates history into somebody who's like, this is interesting. I could see the truth in this. So well done you there. Someone somewhere is listening to this episode right now, and she is, for lack of better words, she's sinking. She's sinking hard, and things seem very scary, very unstable, and she's not quite sure what the next step is. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
I would say we learn as much from setbacks as we do anything, and we need you. We need your talent. We need your resilience. We need you to reach inside yourself, find those internal strengths. No one is here by accident. If you have tuned into this podcast and you're working hard to keep your spirits afloat at this very difficult time, we need your vision. We need your wisdom. We need you, period. Keep going. I'm rooting for you.
Maggie, we need you too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mary.